Hey everyone, it's Allie. With the release of 1.0 for Last Epoch very quickly approaching us, I've seen quite a lot of new cuties around that have been asking quite a lot of questions about Last Epoch. From all the questions I've seen both on YouTube and on Twitch, I've decided to compile a list of a bunch of helpful tips that I don't think a lot of people know that I think would make your life a lot easier if you didn't know about it, or potentially give you some new piece of information that you currently didn't know. For this guide, I'm going to attempt to keep every tip under 1 minute just so we can get through everything as fast as we can. And I don't really know how many tips we'll have in here, but I'm going to try to just throw absolutely everything I can think of at you that I would assume most people are not familiar with or would like a little bit more info on. The first thing I want to cover is going to be a bunch of websites and a bunch of tools that are very useful to keep in mind. First one is going to be Last Epoch Tools. Last Epoch Tools does a lot of things. For example, it has curated build guides. These are specifically build guides that have been approved by the people running the website. These are guaranteed to have a lot of depth into them, and these are guaranteed to be guided experiences all the way through whatever build you want to play, while at the same time offering a build tab, which is going to just simply curate everything that is made as a build guide that is posted anywhere that has to do with Last Epoch. For example, this is coming from YouTube and this is coming from the Last Epoch forums. So you'll be able to see a lot more things on here, and most of the things on here are going to specifically be videos. And the really nice thing about this is you can filter them. For example, if I want to look at a Necromancer summon Bone Golem setup, these are all the different build guides and all the different YouTube videos on that specific topic. The next thing I want to cover about Last Epoch Tools is going to be the build planner. Now, the build planner is effectively this game's version of Path of Building if you come from Path of Exile. What we're going to be able to do in here is we're going to be able to put together a build, and it's going to be very easy for us to see all the details about it. Allow us to pre-plan if we want to. For example, if I want to make a Necromancer and I wanted to look at chest plates, if I click on the chest plate slot, here's every single chest plate that we can equip as a Necromancer. And if I want to craft something, for example, I can pick up this base, I can then go over to prefix, add a prefix such as scaly damage on it, add a secondary prefix, maybe ward on hungering souls, add the suffixes in as well, and then all you have to do is just hit save, and then your item is going to be a part of your build. You can add in idols, you can add in blessings, and the really nice thing about this is if you go over to the passive tree, you can very easily plan your passive tree in here. Now, the really nice thing about this is going to be the record option. If we turn the record option on, it's then going to look at everything that you've actually done. And it's going to memorize the order that you put it in. For example, here, if we pick up a bunch of points in Acolytes, then we go pick up a bunch of points in Lich, a bunch of points in Warlock, a bunch of points in Necromancer, and maybe go back to Lich and pick up a few more. And then we hit stop whenever we're ready, or if we allocate all the passive points that we normally would have. It would then give us a really nice slider at the bottom that's going to showcase us everything that we did during the recording in order. And every time we stop the slider, whatever the thing that changed was is going to be highlighted in green, make it very easy for you to know exactly what you picked. At the same time, this would also work for skills. If you want to specifically plan out how you'd want to put together a skill, you would just simply have to pick all the points with the recording feature turned on, stop, and then as you can see, all of your actions will be recorded. Now, the only thing that this doesn't do currently is the calculations tab. Currently, if you want to know what your DPS would be in here, you cannot use it for that as only a few skills are supported. Hopefully in the future, a lot more skills are going to be supported. Nice thing is you can also save this if you want to, and it'll give you a link. Or if you're logged into a website, after you click save, you can add it to your builds, give it a name. And if we go over to my builds, we can see this is every single build planner I've ever made. And I could very easily use this to filter through all the builds I've ever made to find something specific. Next thing we should mention about Last Epoch Tools is going to be the loot filter section of it. So this section is amazing if you are afraid of loot filters or if you think they're a little bit too scary and you don't want to deal with them. On the right side, we can specifically filter for whatever skill we're interested in. For example, let's say we want to look at some mage-based filters and we want to specifically look at one that uses Glyph of Domination. We can very easily find some filters. Now, the other thing we can mention here is the create loot filter option. Now, you can create one from scratch if you know what you're doing, or you can import one from in-game and edit in here, which is really nice because it's going to show you the stats that can roll on specific gear. Or specifically, we can use one for a build planner, which would just take whatever kind of planner you have. And there's also an option here, and it will make a filter for whatever you have set up in here. It'll try its best to give you the proper stats. Finally, we have the filter wizard, which if you can give it a bit of info, for example, let's say we're playing a primalist. Let's say we're specifically playing a throwing build. We're going to be doing specifically physical damage. We are going to be applying frenzy, and we're going to be using specifically fury leaf, giving the filter wizard all the information you need like this and going through and adding everything that it needs, specifically the things that have a star by them at a minimum, and then filling in the things that you're interested for, will then take all that info and create you a filter for specifically what you asked it to do. Nice thing about these filters is they will have a leveling section baked in right into them, which is going to make it very nice for leveling, as well as it also having a pretty decent endgame setup with some other important rules that you might want to see for endgame. Now, the next one I want to showcase to you is going to be TunkLabs. Now, TunkLabs is a really good website for some very specific info that Last Epoch Tools doesn't provide. Good example here is going to the defense tab and looking at armor. This, for example, shows us the graph for how armor works. So as we can see here, it's 7,600 armor. We would take 73% less physical damage and 51% less non-physical damage against a monster level 100 area. We can also go over to a shred tab. As you can see here, this is how armor shred actually works in the game. As you can see, at 2 stacks of armor shred, I'd be gaining an additional 8% physical damage, an additional 6% non-physical damage, while at the same time at 98 stacks, I'd be gaining 77% increased physical damage and 53% more non-physical damage. We'd also put in a set amount of armor if we want to look at what they would look like with 1,000 armor, but realistically, looking at the default chart of 0 armor is correct in most cases, as monsters don't have any armor unless otherwise specified. So there's other really useful charts in here as well. For example, if we look at the chart of dodge, so as we can see, this is how much dodge chance we'd have with a given evasion rating at monster level 100. We'd also look at the block chart on here. And at the same time, it also offers you the ability to look at a database of items. For example, if we want to look at unique items, we can here very easily see the reroll chance of a bunch of items if we want to. And if we want to filter this, we can, for example, look at boots. And as we can see here, we can see a bunch of stats about boots. The final thing I want to mention about TunkLabs are other useful things, such as the Rune of Ascendance simulator. For example, if you want to look at body armors and we use 8,000 runes of Ascendance, this will show us exactly what we would have expected. So if you want to know how rare something is, we can very quickly see the exact rarities of whatever you're interested in, specifically Rune of Ascending. Other really nice thing is going to be the Glyph of Insight calculator. This calculator is a very endgame crafting tool. This is not a thing most people are going to need, but this, for example, will allow you to put in the parameters behind your Glyph of Insight attempt, and it'll tell you exactly what's going to happen, as we have perfectly figured out how Glyphs of Insight actually work. Now, why don't we go over to the game and talk about some tips that we can discuss inside the game itself. So the first thing I want to mention is if you just hit G, you can open up the game guide. Now, I know a lot of people probably don't know this exists here, and a lot of people might be thinking, Allie, is this really that useful? The one in PoE is kind of bad. Yes. The one in Last Epoch is actually really good, and the devs have taken their time to try and make it as good as they can. And unlike, for example, Path of Exile's game guide, this one mostly just goes over a lot of mechanics and a lot of things that you might be interested in. So for example, if we were to look at Ward, we can very quickly see exactly how word works, as well as it providing us a formula on exactly the mechanics behind how word decay works. If you want to look at dodge, as we can see exactly how dodge works here and the formula behind it, as well as it giving us ways to go between different game guide sections if they're ever relevant. For example, if you want to know what damage over time is, here is damage over time. It tells you exactly what it is, exactly what it can do. It can tell you the differences between hit and damage over time. For example, what if we want to know what a block is and how it works? Here's a block, here's how it works. What if we want to know how crits work? Here's a crit, here's how crit works, here's a few examples of how crit would sack, here's how leech works, and there's a lot of other useful things with a lot of examples in here. A lot of your basic questions about a lot of basic mechanics can be answered through a game guide, and I really recommend you just hit G every once in a while and try to search for here if you want to know about something specific to see if the game guide can provide it for you. To continue talking about the very useful information that the game provides for you in game, if we were to hold Control and Alt over an item, as you can see, every stat that needs some sort of explanation has a built-in tooltip to tell you more about it. Some of these can have paragraphs, so if you really need to know about a specific mod, I would highly recommend for you to hold Control Alt over a piece of gear and see if there's any sort of useful information in here that might tell you a little bit more about whatever you want to know. Now, if you do not go into your settings and specifically turn on auto compare, that means for you, when you hold Alt, you're going to get that information. But instead, if you do have auto compare turned on, what your Alt is now going to do is when you hold Alt, it's going to show you the ranges and the tiers of everything on an item. So for example, on this belt, we can see that the chance to find poisons is a tier 5 craftable roll, and it re-rolled 50 out of a total range of 50 to 60. To keep going with all of this very useful information that the game provides for you directly in game, we have skill tooltips. So typically, if you hold Alt on a skill tooltip, it's going to give you a lot more information about it. For example, here at the bottom, we can see that it scales off of intelligence, and we can see the rate at which it scales, as well as look at the healing effectiveness of the ability. A lot of other abilities will have text that is specifically underlined and specifically colored white. As you can see here, if we hold Alt, we get more information about it. So if you want to know more about Blood Splatter, we just hold Alt and we can see all the information we need to know about Blood Splatter, as well as on the left side being given the tooltip of the ability, even though this is a sub-ability of a skill and it's not something you'd ever actually cast. The game tries to do whatever it can to provide you as much information about any single node that you actually need to know about. In some cases, it'll even provide you with a little bit of an example if the devs felt like that specific node or specific interaction needed a little bit more of an explanation. Now, I just want to very quickly showcase you my favorite tooltip that the devs have actually added into the game, and I think it's absolutely hilarious. For example, for a net, the tooltip specifically on Spear Trap gives you an example, If Puncture has no mana cost, this effect would still cost 0 mana. 115% of 0 is still 0. I saw this today, and honestly, I just thought it was really funny, and I wanted to showcase it to everyone because it's pretty good tool tip. The math does very much check out on it still being 0. To keep going with all this useful information that the game provides for you in game, I want to talk about attributes. So I don't think a lot of people know that all attributes actually provide something else other than scaling for your abilities. For example, if you look at Summon Skeletal Mage, we can see at the bottom that it gains 5 health per intelligence and 4% increased damage per intelligence. But those stats do more than just give you damage for your abilities. For example, if you were to hover over Vitality, we can see that each point of Vitality gives you 6 health as well as 1% poison and necrotic resistance. Each point of Intelligence also gives you 4% word retention. Each point of Strength also gives you 4% armor, while each point of Dexterity gives you 4 dodge. Pretty much every single tooltip in the character panel is going to tell you a little bit more information about it, and it's actually going to even potentially give you a few examples on how it works. One thing that I don't actually think a lot of people know in this game, because it just doesn't really make sense if you were to come from a different ARPG, as other ARPGs just don't work like this, is armor. So in this game, armor specifically isn't just for physical damage reduction. As we can see here in the additional defenses area, we can see that 233 armor is giving us 10% DR, but if we were to hover over it, we can see that armor is 70% effective against non-physical damage as well. And as you can see here, it specifically shows us that means we get 7% damage reduction against anything that hits us. Now, if I were to change this, it would update in here and show us that instead now, with my 600 armor, it's 18% and 12% DR against everything that's non-physical. Now let's start covering some really useful leveling tips that I think people should know about. So the first one I want to talk about is going to be the vendor in the first town. When you first start a character, you'll get to Keeper's Camp very, very quickly. And what I would highly recommend for everyone to do is to immediately come over to the vendor and trade with them and buy whatever you can from here. Typically, by the time you get to town, you're going to make somewhere around 100 gold, and most of the gear in here is going to be very cheap. Now, unfortunately, the vendors do scale with your level, but most of the gear in here would typically be worth somewhere between 5 to 10 gold at most, and you might sometimes even find some well-rolled items in here that'll make your journey to start a lot easier. The biggest example I can give you is look for specifically relics. Sometimes, depending on your class, you'll find some relics that give you increased chance to bleed, chance to poison, chance to ignite, and I would highly recommend for you to pick up that as well as any other items that have some sort of chance to do an ailment on them, as ailments are incredibly powerful at the start of your leveling experience. For example, I might do something like 10 damage with Smite at level 5 or level 6, while at the same time, if I were to get a 20% chance to poison, if I were to actually apply poison, that poison is going to tick for 20, is doing basically double the damage I'd actually be doing with Smite. Ailments are incredibly powerful no matter what build you're playing at the start of your leveling experience. I'd highly recommend to check out the shop to see if there's anything useful before you head on through the rest of the leveling experience. Now, there are 2 final things I want to mention that are going to make your gameplay, in my opinion, feel a lot smoother depending on the build that you're playing. The first thing I want to mention is that you can actually set a Minion Attack Key in this key, allowing you to perfectly control your minions however you want. Now, one thing I want to mention about this is that this will not be an attack move. For example, if I were to just specifically send my minion over here, it would not work as an attack move. But if I specifically use the command while hovering over an enemy, it will work as an attack move and it will make the minion specifically attack that target. Now, the way you set this up is very simple. Just simply go to settings, go over to change input keys. If you were to scroll down a tiny little bit, you'll be able to find yourself the Minion Attack command, and you can set this to whatever you want. Personally, I really like it on space and it feels really comfortable on space. I don't really need space for anything else. So for me, using space for any sort of minion build does feel very, very comfortable. The other thing I want to mention is going to be the numlock trick. Now, this is something I've discussed quite heavily in a lot of different videos, but I do want to mention it one more time here as well. So numlock trick effectively allows you to permanently auto-cast an ability without you having to do anything. For example, I have summon volatile zombies. It's a skill that I want to use on cooldown every single time it's up. What I could do is, for example, is I can numlock it like this, and every time the cooldown for summon volatile zombies is over, the game will automatically recast the ability for me. Now, one thing I do want to mention about this is you cannot use it for any sort of ability that is instant cast with no cooldown. This has to be an ability with cooldown, because for example, if I were to numlock Infernal Shade, as you can see, I will just sit here and keep spamming Infernal Shade on cooldown without me really being able to play the game. And it'll keep going until I have no mana. You have to specifically use for an ability with a cooldown that you'd want to use over and over again. Now, setting this up is also very, very simple to do. All we have to do is just go back into the settings. And if we were to go over to change input keys one more time, all we have to do is find our abilities and find the ones that we specifically want to numlock. And all we have to do is specifically set their keybinds to some sort of keypad key. Then all we have to do to get this set up is simply turn on our block on our numpad. You want to make sure the light is on. Then you're going to hold down the key that you want to automate. In my case, it would be summon volatile zombies, which is on numpad 9. And then while I'm holding down the key, as you can see, the icon itself is grayed out. As you can see, now it's not grayed out. Now it is grayed out. And while you hold this down and it's grayed out like that, you are just going to hit your numlock key again. The light on your keyboard is going to turn off. And as you can see, if you take your hands off your keyboard, that the icon will stay grayed out like this, and the ability will automatically cast it for you every time that the cooldown comes back up. Now, the one thing I want to mention about this is it will last through absolutely everything. If I were to, for example, go through a loading screen, if I were to go and start a monolith, it will not break no matter what. The only thing that will ever break this is specifically tabbing out. If you were to ever tab out of Last Epoch, you would have to reset up your numpad again, and that's simply just a Windows issue. Now, one thing I want to mention here is obviously, what do you do if you don't have a numpad? You could potentially use auto hotkey, but I do want to warn you, auto hotkey is only allowed in this game specifically for numpad for the people who don't have a numpad on their keyboard. Or you could potentially go into your keyboard software and specifically set up some other key to work as a numpad for you and some other key to work as any of the numpad numbers. And that's all I have to talk about in this video. I hope some of these tips were useful to you. I hope that these might help you along your journey at the release of 1.0. And I hope some of these maybe just made your life a little bit easier or taught you about something that you didn't really know about before. If you have any other questions, cuties, please feel free to leave a comment in the description below, and I'll be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so if you'd like to come and ask your questions there, I'll be more than happy to answer for you live. Or if you just simply want to come hang out with all the cuties, I'll be more than happy to see you around. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you cuties in the next one.